I knew I had lost him the night I heard my own key not turn in my own door. The metal teeth met the lock and caught like a cough. And when I tried again, there was the quiet, awful resistance of a bolt I never installed. I stood in the dim hall, holding a bag of groceries that cut crescents into my fingers, listening to my son's laughter spill from the living room where the lights were warm and I was not invited. "Leave it, Mom," he said when I knocked, his voice tired and gentle, the way people talk to children. "We're putting the baby down." I waited there with milk, sweating through the plastic, and felt the cold creep up my sleeves. When the door finally opened an inch, the chain still across, I saw only Lily's eye, brown, diluted with impatience, before the chain slid free and she let me in like a delivery. My name is Mary. I am 69 years old, and my hands remember every small sacrifice better than my mouth can tell them. I can thread a button by touch, fold a fitted sheet without thinking, break a whole chicken into neat parts, and stretch it into 3 meals. I raised my boy, Daniel, with those hands. I taught him to tie his laces by knotting mine first so he could copy. I sat in a parked bus for an hour after a late shift so I could ride all the way back just to save the fare. When his father left, I sold my wedding ring to pay for his braces because the dentist said the pain would be less with the right fit, and I could not bear the thought of my child hurting because I could not afford symmetry. I told myself, as the pawnshop door clicked shut, that love does not need ornaments, only proof. Lily came like a new season I wasn't dressed for. She was pretty in the polished way that makes you straighten your spine and check your hair in a window. She had soft sweaters without a single pull and nails that shone even when she pretended they didn't. I wanted to like her. I tried to be the kind of mother-in-law who brings soup when she is sick and goes home before she finishes her tea, so nobody feels crowded. When they asked if they could move in, just for a while, to save for the baby, I said yes without counting the rooms, because mothers don't measure love in square meters. I pulled my own bed against the wall to make space for the bassinet. I rolled my rug and tied it with twine and set it upright in the corner like a friend waiting for better days. At first, it felt almost holy. 2 heartbeats under one roof, then 3, then the small miracle of 4 when the baby came home and the house began to breathe in a new rhythm. I learned the soft steps that do not wake a newborn, the way to swaddle without trapping tiny fingers, the swiftness of warming a bottle before a cry becomes a storm. I cooked soups that smelled like my mother's kitchen, leek and potato, chicken with rice, lentil with lemon. Daniel kissed my cheek as he left for work, and Lily let me hold the baby long enough for my shoulders to remember what purpose felt like. But there is a thin line between help and servitude, and you only notice you've crossed it when you look back and the line is gone. The first time I heard Lily say, "Your mother," it snagged on my ear like a burr. Your mother forgot to buy the brand he likes. Your mother leaves her knitting on the couch. Your mother doesn't understand how we do things now. I told myself it was sleep deprivation, hormones, the wet sand of new motherhood you sink into without meaning to. I took the baby for walks so she could shower in peace. I wiped down the sink after brushing my teeth. I set my alarm to do the laundry before dawn so the machine wouldn't be too loud during the baby's morning nap. Money slid into the picture the way water finds every crack. Daniel's hours got cut, then the car needed brakes, then Lily's maternity pay came late, then the landlord adjusted the rent for a temporary market correction. We sat at the table, where I had taught my son fractions with sugar cubes, stacking and splitting until the world made sense. Now the math made my stomach burn. "It's just for a bit," Daniel said, not quite meeting my eyes. "You've got the savings from when you sold the house." The word "you" clanged against "we," and the old ache of the ring I pawned many years ago pulsed in my finger. I had not told Lily about the little apartment I kept in my name after selling the house his father and I fought in. I had rented it out to a nice couple who paid on time, and the money sat like a patient in a quiet bank, meant for emergencies that wore my name. When Daniel asked, I told him the truth. What is mine is yours, but what is yours must not forget me. I transferred enough to cover 3 months and kept my mouth shut about the buzzing in my chest that sounded like a warning. The warning grew louder when letters began arriving with my name on the envelope, but their address inside. Strangers wrote to tell me about balances and penalties. I found a folded paper on the console table one afternoon, an application for a different apartment across town. 2 bedrooms, small balcony, ideal for young family, with Daniel and Lily's names neat as schoolwork. My name wasn't on the form. I placed the paper back exactly as I had found it, like a maid in a hotel room. That night over dinner, I asked only once, "Are you looking at other places?" Lily's fork paused midair. Daniel cleared his throat. "Just options," he said. "Nothing decided." The baby dropped a spoon, and I bent to retrieve it so they wouldn't see the way my mouth trembled. Birthdays should be safe, but they aren't. Not always. For mine, they ordered a cake and had my name piped in a looping script that spelled Mary correctly and everything. The baby wore a paper hat he hated, and Daniel lit all the candles even though I told him my wish didn't need fire. After we ate, Lily slid a small gift bag across the table. Inside was a key fob, the soft kind that fits in a pocket without scratching. "For the new place," she said, her smile wide and unblinking. "We thought you'd want to see it before we move." We move. The words stood up and walked around the room. Daniel reached for my hand. "It's closer to Lily's parents," he said. "They can help more. It's just practical." I looked at my son and saw a little boy holding a permission slip he wanted me to sign. We drove at dusk. The city turned itself into a necklace, beads of light on a black throat. The building was tall and faceless, with a lobby that smelled like lemon and new paint. A young man at the desk looked past me to smile at Lily. The elevator hummed like a polite secret. We stepped out onto a floor that looked like all the other floors, and Daniel, my Daniel, walked with a bounce I recognized from his childhood when he had something to show me he was proud of. He opened a door and stood aside for me to enter first, because he is still, in his bones, a good boy who was taught manners. The apartment was white. There were boxes already stacked by the wall with labels in Lily's script: kitchen, nursery, office. I did not see one that said Mary. "Your room will be cozy," Lily said, and I heard the word "will" like a door closing. Down the hall, next to the laundry. My room, not my home. The window in my room faced a brick wall. I could have reached out and touched it if glass were not there. A dryer thumped on the other side of the plaster, as if someone were knocking to be let out. I sat on the edge of the narrow bed they had already placed there. Who places a bed before asking a question? And I smoothed the coverlet with my palm. "We were going to tell you," Daniel said from the doorway, his voice the thin rope thrown from a ship already pulling away. "It's just practical," I finished for him, and my voice did not break because I had learned over years to speak while carrying heavy things. When we went back to the living room, a man in a blazer was waiting, holding a folder. "Mrs. Evans?" he asked, and I nodded before remembering that I am many things, but not that name anymore. "I'm the agent. If you'd like to sign, we can finalize tonight. The unit's in your son's name and his wife's." He glanced at me, his smile trained not to falter. "You'll be listed as an occupant." Occupant. I felt the syllables settle on my shoulders like dust. My grocery bag fingers, my ringless hand, my patient savings, occupant. I looked at Daniel. He shifted his weight, a boy again, caught between what he owed and what he was told. "Mom," he said softly, "it's better this way." I walked to the window and pressed my palm to the glass. The city stared back without blinking. Behind me, paper rustled, pens clicked. A baby made the small sleep noises that sound like forgiveness. I let the cool seep into my skin until it stung enough to make me feel awake. Then I turned, and when I spoke, I sounded like my mother in the moment she decided we would survive without anyone's permission. "If I sign," I said, and even Lily stilled, "we do it with my conditions." The agent looked up. Daniel's eyes flicked to Lily, and the dryer knocked once more in the wall like a drumbeat. "Because I gave my son everything," I said, "and I won't sign away the last of me." I stood in that apartment doorway longer than I should have, my palms still tingling from where the glass had pressed back against me. When the agent left and the baby stirred, everyone tried to fold the evening back into something normal. Lily busied herself stacking boxes. Daniel hummed while rocking the baby, and I sat silently, measuring the weight of what had just been asked of me. Occupant. The word clung like damp clothes. That night, in my narrow assigned room, I lay awake listening to the dryer thump through the wall. Each thud echoed the thought that perhaps my life had been reduced to laundry cycles, useful only when needed, forgotten once the machine went quiet. Morning brought no clarity, only the smell of fresh coffee I hadn't brewed. Daniel was already dressed, tie knotted, shoes polished. He looked like the boy who used to beg me to fix his collar before school picture day. "Mom," he said, eyes darting between me and the floor, "it's really better this way. Closer to Lily's family, more space for the baby." His words trailed off, leaving me to fill the silence with memories of every time I had moved mountains for him. I smiled, but it wasn't the warm kind. It was the brittle kind that hides cracks. "Of course, Daniel. Practical," I whispered, the word already tasting bitter. Later, I walked through the new apartment while they argued about curtain colors. My fingers traced the white walls, each one cold, indifferent. The kitchen gleamed with untouched steel appliances that had no stories yet, no overboiled soup, no flour dust from holiday pies. My home had been alive with echoes, Daniel's giggles, the hiss of a leaky kettle, the creak of stairs his father once stomped down before never returning. Here, silence ruled. I caught my reflection in the spotless oven door, a woman whose sacrifices had been scrubbed away as neatly as fingerprints on stainless steel. The first real crack came 2 weeks later. A letter arrived addressed to me, but Lily opened it without hesitation. "It's just the bank," she said casually, waving the paper. I handled it. My heart jolted. That account was mine, the quiet nest egg I had preserved through decades of frugality. I reached for the letter, but she folded it swiftly, slipping it into her purse with a smile too smooth. "You don't need to worry about these things anymore." I stood frozen, the blood roaring in my ears. Not worry. It was my money, my name, my years of skipped lunches and patch coats. I realized then that the line I thought I had drawn was already smudged beyond recognition. That evening, I confronted Daniel gently, choosing my words like stepping stones across a fast river. Your wife took my mail. She kept it. He shifted uncomfortably, setting the baby down in his crib before answering. Mom, she's just trying to help. She's better with finances, more organized. His voice faded when he saw my face. I wanted to scream, to remind him of who had balanced pennies until they became tuition, who had lived without heat one winter so his room could stay warm. Instead, I whispered, "And where does that leave me, Daniel? What am I here, if not your mother?" He opened his mouth, then closed it, as if the answer was too heavy to lift. The days blurred into chores and half-heard conversations. Lily began introducing me to neighbors as Daniel's mom who stays with us, her tone always carrying a faint suggestion of inconvenience. At night, I lay in that small room, listening to laughter muffled by walls, and I wondered if my presence had become a shadow they wished would fade. Still, I endured, because mothers endure. I rose early to fold laundry, cooked meals no one praised, held the baby until my arms ached. Every smile from my grandson was a thread that stitched me back together, even as the fabric of my dignity frayed. Then came the night of the dinner. Lily's parents visited, bringing wine and loud voices that filled the apartment, with a cheer I hadn't felt in years. We all gathered around the table, me slightly apart, my chair wedged near the corner. Glasses clinked, laughter rose, and talk turned to the future. "Once the papers are final," Lily's father said, "you'll be secure. No worries about old debts or attachments." My fork slipped from my hand, clattering onto the plate. Papers, final. My eyes darted to Daniel, who suddenly found his glass fascinating. "What papers?" I asked, voice trembling. No one answered. The room's warmth turned suffocating, the air heavy with unspoken truths. In that silence, something inside me hardened. I realized that I had given and given until there was nothing left of me to protect. They had not asked for my blessing. They had taken it, like the ring, like the savings, like the very roof over my head. My son, the boy I had shielded from storms with my own body, sat complicit, his silence louder than any betrayal. I excused myself quietly, retreating to the narrow room where the dryer no longer thumped, but my heart did. Sitting on the edge of the bed, I made a vow. They could strip me of titles, call me occupant, diminish my place in the world, but they would not take the last word from my mouth, nor the truth I carried in my chest. And as I stared at the bare wall, I knew the storm I had kept leashed for years was finally stirring, waiting for its moment to break. I woke the next morning with a heaviness pressing on my chest, the kind that no amount of deep breathing could lift. The small room I had been given was suffocating in its plainness, with bare walls and a single window that faced nothing but brick. I sat up on the edge of the bed, staring at the worn slippers by my feet, and thought about all the years I had spent making a home feel alive. Curtains that caught the morning sun, photographs that told our story, cushions faded by too many washings, but softened by countless embraces. Here there was nothing of me. I was a guest in my own life, reduced to four walls and a door that shut me away from the people I had once called my entire world. That day, Lily moved with unusual energy, bustling around the apartment with her phone pressed to her ear. "Yes, we'll have the documents ready," I heard her say, her voice lilting with satisfaction. When she noticed me watching, she smiled in that sharp way that never reached her eyes. "Just finalizing some things for the move," she explained, as if I were a child too simple to grasp the details. My instincts told me it wasn't about curtains or rent contracts. It was about control, about securing her place and pushing me further into the margins until I disappeared entirely. Daniel returned from work late that evening, his tie loosened, his shoulders heavy with exhaustion. I waited for the right moment, then asked softly, "What documents was Lily speaking of?" His eyes flickered, a silent betrayal. "Mom, please, don't make this harder. It's just paperwork, nothing for you to worry about." That phrase again, "nothing for you to worry about." It stabbed deeper than any insult. All my life I had worried, planned, sacrificed, so he wouldn't have to. And now my reward was dismissal, a pat on the head, as though my years of carrying him on my back had earned me nothing but irrelevance. Later that week, I went to the old neighborhood. My legs carried me without much thought, retracing steps worn smooth by years of routine. The corner store still smelled of spices and warm bread. The shopkeeper, an old friend, greeted me with the warmth I had been starved of. "Mary, it's been too long. How's Daniel?" I forced a smile, murmuring vague pleasantries, but inside my chest, shame coiled tight. I longed to tell someone the truth, that I, the woman who had given her son everything, now lived as a shadow in his new life, but pride silenced me. Instead, I bought a loaf of bread and lingered by the shelves longer than necessary, savoring the faint comfort of being remembered. When I returned to the apartment, Lily was waiting. "Where have you been?" she asked sharply, as though I were a teenager breaking curfew. "We needed you here. The baby's been fussy all afternoon." Her words stung, not because of the request, but because of the assumption that I was accountable to her. I nodded quietly, washed my hands, and took the child into my arms. His tiny fingers curled around mine, innocent and trusting, and for a moment, the storm inside me calmed. But when I looked up, I saw Lily's eyes narrow, as though she resented even this small bond between me and my grandson. The tension grew thicker with each passing day. Meals became battlegrounds of silence. If I seasoned the soup, Lily claimed it was too salty. If I folded the laundry, she redid it, sighing heavily as if I had ruined something precious. Daniel hovered between us, torn but silent, a rope pulled taut until it threatened to snap. I wanted to shake him, to remind him of who I was, the woman who had kissed every scraped knee, who had skipped meals so he could have seconds. But he wouldn't meet my gaze anymore. His loyalty had shifted, and I was no longer the center of his world. The breaking point came one Sunday afternoon. I was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables, when Lily's voice rose in the living room. "We can't keep waiting, Daniel. Your mother needs to understand her place. This is our home, not hers." My hands froze on the knife. The words hit like stones, each one heavier than the last. I pressed my palm against the counter to steady myself, listening as Daniel replied, his voice low but clear enough to carry. "I know, Lily. I'll talk to her." The world tilted, and I had to grip the counter to keep from falling. My son, my only child, was preparing to cast me aside, and he did it so casually, as if it were just another errand on his list. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. Every breath of the dryer, every muffled laugh from their room, every creak of the floorboards felt like proof that I had become invisible. But beneath the grief, something else stirred, a resolve I hadn't felt in years. I would not let them erase me. I had built my life from ashes before, when his father abandoned us, when money ran out, when hope seemed distant. I had survived, and I could survive again. This time, though, it would not be through silence. This time, I would speak. I would fight. I would remind my son of the truth he had forgotten. The next morning, I dressed carefully, smoothing the wrinkles from my blouse, combing my hair with deliberate patience. I looked in the mirror and saw not a frail old woman, but the mother who had once carried the weight of 2 lives on her shoulders. When I stepped into the kitchen, Lily raised an eyebrow at my appearance. "Going somewhere?" she asked. I met her gaze steadily. "Yes," I said, my voice firm. "I have business to attend to." She smirked, as though amused by the idea of me having business, but I didn't flinch. I walked out of that apartment with my head held high, my heart pounding, my mind racing with plans. I wasn't sure yet what steps I would take, but I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I would not be pushed into the shadows any longer. They had mistaken my silence for weakness. They had mistaken my sacrifices for submission. But they were about to learn that even the quietest women carry storms within them, storms that, once unleashed, can shake the foundations of every false wall built against them. And as I closed the building's heavy door behind me, I felt the first rumble of thunder in my chest. When I stepped outside that morning, the air felt sharper, cleaner, as though the world itself knew I was no longer walking as an invisible guest, but as a woman with a purpose. My steps carried me through streets I hadn't walked in years, toward the one place that had always reminded me of my strength, the old apartment I once called mine. I had rented it out long ago to a quiet couple, and the little monthly payment had become my safety net, my secret proof that I still had a corner of this world that belonged to me. Standing in front of that familiar door, I felt both shame and relief wash over me. Shame, because I had let myself be pushed to a point where I needed to retreat here. Relief, because I knew I still had somewhere to stand if everything else collapsed. I didn't go inside that day. I only touched the cool brass of the doorknob like greeting an old friend. Then I turned and walked to the bank. It was time to see exactly how much of my life Lily had tried to slip her hands into. Sitting across from the bank officer, I asked for my account details. He tapped at his computer, frowned, then handed me a printout. My eyes scanned the numbers, and my breath caught in my throat. Several withdrawals had been made in recent weeks, sums I had not authorized. My hands trembled as I clutched the paper. "There must be a mistake," I whispered. The officer shook his head gently. "They were approved online, Mrs. Evans. Do you recognize this co-signatory?" He slid another paper toward me, and there it was. Daniel's name, written with the same looping script I had once watched him practice as a boy on lined paper. The betrayal pressed so hard against my chest that I thought I might not breathe again. My son, my flesh and blood, had dipped his hand into the well of my sacrifices without even asking. I walked out of that bank on unsteady legs, the city spinning around me, cars honking, people rushing, while I moved like a ghost. In my head, memories collided, me tying his shoes, me holding his hand at the doctor's office, me selling my wedding ring so he could smile without pain. And now he had sold my trust for a stack of papers and Lily's approval. By the time I returned to the apartment, I was no longer trembling. I was burning. Lily was in the living room, rocking the baby, humming a lullaby. She looked up, her smile smug, as if she had already won a battle I hadn't known we were fighting. Long day? She asked lightly. I didn't answer. I walked straight past her into the kitchen where Daniel was pouring himself a glass of water. We need to talk, I said, my voice steady, though my hands clenched tight. He glanced at me nervously. Now? Can it wait? My eyes locked on his. No, not one more second. I placed the bank papers on the table, sliding them toward him. His face drained of color. Mom, I can explain, he began, but I cut him off. Explain what? That the boy I raised, the boy I gave everything to, now steals from me? That you signed your name to what isn't yours? The glass shook in his hand, water spilling onto the counter. It wasn't like that. Lily said. At the sound of her name, my fury flared. Lily said. Always Lily said. When did my voice stop mattering to you, Daniel? When did the woman who carried you in her arms become less than the woman who carries you in her bed? My words cracked through the air, sharp and unyielding. Silence followed, broken only by the baby's small whimper from the other room. Daniel's shoulders sagged, his mouth opening and closing, like a fish gasping for air. Lily entered, holding the baby against her chest, her eyes cold. Mary, lower your voice. You'll wake him. I turned toward her slowly, the weight of years gathering behind me. He is already awake, I said softly, awake to the truth that his mother is nothing to him but a signature to exploit and a body to house. For the first time, I saw something flicker in Lily's eyes, not triumph, but fear. She shifted uncomfortably, her grip on the baby tightening. Daniel ran his hand through his hair, muttering, "This isn't fair. You're twisting things." I laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. Fair? Do you want to talk about fair? Was it fair that I ate bread crusts so you could have full meals? Was it fair that I worked 2 jobs while my body ached so you could go to school with shoes that fit? Was it fair that I gave up every dream I had so you could chase yours? And now, when I ask only for dignity, you strip even that from me? The room was thick with the weight of my words. Daniel sank into a chair, burying his face in his hands. Lily stayed silent, rocking the baby with a rhythm that betrayed her unease. I gathered the bank papers back into my purse and stood tall. I will not be your silent victim, I said clearly. If you want a life without me, then so be it. But you will not take what little I have left to build it. I will fight you, Daniel, not because I hate you, but because I love myself enough to know I deserve better. I left the kitchen then, my heart pounding, my hands shaking. In my room, I sat on the edge of the narrow bed, the walls pressing close. Tears slipped down my cheeks, but they were not tears of weakness. They were the baptism of my awakening. I had been quiet too long, forgiving too much, shrinking too small, but that part of me was gone now, buried under the weight of betrayal. What rose in its place was fiercer, sharper, unafraid. That night, I lay awake and listened to the storm outside. Rain lashed against the window, thunder cracked in the distance, and for the first time in years, I felt a strange kinship with the storm. It was wild, uncontrollable, impossible to silence. I closed my eyes, whispering to myself, "They will learn who I am. They will remember my name." And in the shadows of that small, suffocating room, I began to plan, not for their comfort, not for their approval, but for my own survival, my own justice. The storm within me was no longer just stirring, it was ready to break. I woke the next morning to the faint hum of voices in the kitchen. My door was thin, and every sound seeped through like water through cracked stone. Lily's voice was sharp, clipped. "She can't stay here forever, Daniel. It isn't healthy. For us. For the baby. She's always watching, always judging. And now she's accusing us of theft? This is madness." My heart clenched, but I stayed still, listening. Daniel's reply came softer, hesitant. "She's my mother, Lily. I can't just throw her out." The pause that followed was heavier than any shout. Then her voice again, low and dangerous. "If you don't choose us, you'll lose us." I pressed my fist against my mouth to keep from crying out. The boy I had raised was now standing at a fork in the road, me on one side, her on the other. And the worst part was, I already knew which way he was leaning. Later that day, Daniel knocked on my door. His face looked drawn, his eyes tired. "Mom, can we talk?" He sat at the edge of my bed, like he had when he was a little boy, confessing a broken window or a failed test. "Things are tense," he began, rubbing his hands together. "Lily's just protective. She thinks you don't trust her, and it's making her feel unwelcome in her own home." I almost laughed at the absurdity. Her home, the walls that I had helped finance, the food I had paid for, the hours I had spent caring for the baby, all erased with a single word. Still, I swallowed my bitterness and tried to reach him. "Daniel, I have never wanted to come between you and your wife. I only want respect, that's all. Respect for me, for what I've done, for what I still carry." He shifted uncomfortably. "Mom, maybe it would help if you took some time away, just until things calm down." My breath caught. "Time away? You mean leave?" He looked at the floor. "Just for a while. You could stay with Aunt Margaret or, I don't know, somewhere else." The knife twisted deeper. I thought of every night I had stayed awake nursing his fevers, every birthday cake I had scraped together with coins, every fight with his father where I had shielded him from the shouting. And now, when I needed a corner of the world to call mine, my son was offering me exile. I didn't answer him then. I simply turned my face toward the wall. He sighed and left, closing the door with a gentleness that felt like pity. When I was alone again, I let the tears come. Not soft, polite tears, but deep sobs that racked my chest and shook my bones. Yet beneath the grief, a strange clarity began to form. If they wanted me gone, I would not go quietly. I would not be discarded like an old coat left to rot in the attic. The next day, I visited the lawyer's office. I had not stepped into such a place in decades, but desperation sharpens courage. The lawyer, a woman with steady eyes and ink-stained fingers, listened patiently as I told my story. "Do you have proof of the unauthorized withdrawals?" she asked. I handed her the bank papers. She scanned them, her brow tightening. "This is serious. If your son signed without consent, we can pursue legal action. At the very least, we can freeze the account and protect what remains." For a moment, shame burned my cheeks. To take legal steps against my own child felt like betraying my very blood. But then I remembered the words whispered in the kitchen, the papers signed without me, the look of pity in Daniel's eyes when he suggested I leave. Betrayal had already come. It had simply not worn my face. When I returned to the apartment, Lily was waiting. She leaned against the counter, arms folded, lips curved into a smile that was all victory. "Outrunning errands?" she asked. Her tone was sweet, but her eyes were knives. I met her gaze, unflinching. "Yes," I replied calmly. "I had business to attend to." For the first time she blinked, caught off guard by the firmness in my voice. I walked past her without another word, my silence heavier than any insult. That night, Daniel tried again to speak with me. He sat at the kitchen table, his hands restless, tapping against the wood. "Mom, I don't want this to be ugly. I just want peace." I looked at him long and hard, seeing not the boy I had raised, but the man who had chosen comfort over loyalty. "Peace, Daniel," I said softly, "is not built on silence. It's built on truth. And one day you'll have to choose which matters more to you." He didn't answer. His eyes drifted toward the hallway where Lily stood, pretending not to listen. The days that followed were a quiet war. Lily's sighs grew louder, her corrections sharper. She criticized the way I folded the baby's clothes, the way I stirred the soup, even the way I breathed in the same room. Daniel retreated further into himself, avoiding conflict, pretending not to hear, but the tension wrapped around us like barbed wire, each day cutting deeper. And then came the letter. It arrived in a plain envelope, tucked into the stack of mail Daniel carelessly dropped on the table. My name was printed neatly across the front. Inside, in official language and cold print, it confirmed what I had feared. Documents had been filed to transfer certain assets, my assets, into joint ownership under Daniel and Lily. The words blurred as I read, my pulse roaring in my ears. They weren't just trying to push me out of the apartment. They were trying to erase me entirely. I folded the letter carefully, slipped it into my pocket, and stood. My reflection in the darkened window startled me. It wasn't the weary old woman I had grown used to seeing. It was someone harder, sharper, with eyes that no longer begged but promised. They thought I was weak, that age had dulled me, that love had made me blind. But they had forgotten something crucial. A mother who has given everything has nothing left to lose. And a woman with nothing left to lose is the most dangerous of all. That night, as the apartment slept, I sat in the narrow bed with the letter in my lap and whispered to the shadows, "You chose her over me, Daniel. But you will remember who I am. You will remember what I can do." And in the silence that followed, I felt the storm inside me swell, ready to break its chains. The letter in my pocket became a weight I could not ignore. Every time I touched it, every time my fingers brushed against the crisp fold of paper, I was reminded of what they had done. It was proof, not just of betrayal, but of erasure. They had taken my sacrifices, my love, my years, and reduced them to lines of ink that declared I was no longer the keeper of my own life. Nights turned restless. I would wake in the dark and press the letter to my chest, whispering to myself that I still existed, that I would not vanish so easily. I began to notice the small ways Lily tried to tighten her grip. She intercepted mail before I could see it, redirected phone calls, and placed herself between me and every conversation that mattered. If I asked Daniel a question, she answered for him. If I tried to cook dinner, she slid into the kitchen and took the spoon from my hand, saying, "I've got it, Mary. Rest." Rest. Such a kind word twisted into dismissal. She didn't want me to rest. She wanted me silent, compliant, fading into the background until I disappeared altogether. Daniel's silence was the hardest to bear. He no longer sought me out for advice or comfort. He no longer laughed with me over small memories from his childhood. Instead, he walked around me like I was a fragile piece of furniture, something that needed to be tolerated but not touched. One evening, I caught him staring at the baby in his crib, his face shadowed by doubt. For a moment I thought he might come to me, might confess that he knew what they were doing was wrong. But when Lily entered the room, his face hardened and he turned away. It was clear I was losing him. Piece by piece, thread by thread, my son was being pulled away until nothing of him belonged to me anymore. I decided I could not sit and wait to be erased. I returned to the lawyer, this time with the letter in my hand. She read it carefully, her eyes narrowing. "They cannot do this without your consent," she said firmly. "If they've already filed, we can challenge it. But you'll need to be prepared for a fight. Family disputes are ugly." I laughed bitterly. "It's already ugly. It's just not on paper yet." She nodded and began preparing documents, explaining each step, each legal safeguard. As she spoke, I felt a strange strength blooming inside me. It wasn't the desperate love of a mother trying to cling to her child. It was the solid determination of a woman protecting herself, reclaiming her dignity. When I returned home, I found Lily waiting in the living room. She sat with perfect posture, the baby asleep in her arms. "Where do you keep going, Mary?" she asked sweetly, though her eyes glittered with suspicion. I met her gaze evenly. "I don't have to explain myself to you." Her smile faltered for the briefest second before she recovered. "Of course not, but it would be easier if you trusted us." "Trust," I said slowly, "is earned, not stolen." I turned and walked away, leaving her to stew in silence. That small defiance filled me with more relief than I expected. For too long, I had bent myself into silence. Now every word I spoke carried the weight of years I had been forced to swallow. The next days were a battlefield of unspoken tension. Lily grew sharper, her whispers to Daniel more urgent, her complaints about me louder. "She's meddling, she's hiding things, she doesn't respect us." I wanted to scream, "I am not the one hiding," but instead I let my silence speak for me. I carried myself with dignity, refusing to bow to her games. And then came the dinner. Lily's parents visited again, filling the apartment with their laughter and false cheer. I sat quietly at the corner of the table, my plate half full, my eyes on Daniel. Lily's father raised his glass and said, "To the new beginning. Soon, all this will be settled, and you'll be free of burdens." His words hung in the air, and every eye flicked to me. I set my fork down gently. "Burden," I repeated softly, letting the word roll in my mouth like poison. Daniel shifted uncomfortably, but no one spoke. "It's strange," I continued, my voice calm but sharp, "to be called a burden in the very home I built with my sacrifices." The room fell silent. Lily opened her mouth, but I raised a hand. "Do not speak. I am not invisible, and I will not be erased. Not by papers, not by whispers, not by anyone." My voice trembled, not with weakness, but with the force of years pressing forward. "If you think you can push me aside, you are wrong. I am stronger than you realize." Lily's mother gave a nervous laugh, trying to smooth the moment, but the damage was done. The atmosphere curdled, and Daniel excused himself, carrying the baby away. I remained at the table, my eyes fixed on Lily, who sat frozen in her chair. For once, her smile had vanished completely. That night, as I lay in my narrow bed, I replayed the scene over and over. I had spoken, truly spoken, and no one could take those words back. But I also knew something else. The storm I had unleashed was only beginning. They would not sit quietly while I defied them. The days ahead would be harder, crueler. Yet I was no longer afraid. I thought of my grandson, of the small hand that clutched mine with such trust. One day he would ask about his grandmother, and when he did, I wanted the truth to remain, that I was not weak, that I was not silent, that I stood tall even when the people I loved most tried to tear me down. As sleep finally claimed me, I whispered into the darkness, I am not done, not yet. You will all see. And deep inside, I felt the storm grow louder, closer, waiting for the moment when it would finally break. The morning after that tense dinner, the apartment felt like a battlefield after a ceasefire, quiet but heavy with smoke. Daniel avoided my eyes, shuffling through his papers, as if the rustle of documents could drown out the silence. Lily moved briskly, her footsteps sharp on the floor, her voice overly sweet when she spoke to the baby. I made coffee, the old way, letting it bubble slowly on the stove. The aroma filled the kitchen, but no one thanked me. No one even looked. I sat alone at the table, sipping from my cup, thinking of all the mornings I'd brewed coffee in our old home, the sound of Daniel's laughter bouncing off the walls as a boy. The silence now was its own kind of cruelty. But silence can be a weapon too. I decided that if they would treat me like a shadow, I would learn to move like one, listening, watching, gathering. They thought I was powerless, but they had forgotten that years of motherhood had made me patient, observant, able to see truth in the smallest details. That afternoon, when Lily left with the baby to visit her parents, Daniel stayed behind. I found him in the living room, staring at his phone, worry etched on his face. Daniel, I said gently, do you remember the time I pawned my wedding ring? His eyes flicked up, startled by the suddenness of the question. Of course, he said quietly. I was 12. I nodded. I did it so you could have braces, so you wouldn't hide your smile. Every sacrifice I've made has been for you, and now, when I ask for nothing but respect, you turn away. His jaw tightened. It's not that simple, Mom. You don't understand the pressure I'm under. Lily wants stability, security. She says... His voice trailed off, but I didn't need him to finish. I could hear her words in his mouth. Daniel, I said, my voice trembling. When did her voice become louder than mine? When did my love become so small you couldn't hear it anymore? He didn't answer. Instead, he stood abruptly, muttering something about needing air, and left the apartment. I sat on the sofa, staring at the door, long after it closed. My son was slipping through my fingers, and I didn't know how to catch him without crushing him. The days that followed grew colder. Lily began locking certain drawers, keeping her laptop shut whenever I entered the room. She whispered on the phone, her back turned, her words sharp and quick. And Daniel, he became a ghost in his own home. He came and went without speaking, his presence reduced to the sound of his shoes in the hallway. Then, one evening, I returned from a short walk to find them both at the table, with stacks of papers spread before them. The sight stopped me cold. They looked up, startled, like children caught stealing cookies. Lily recovered quickly, flashing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Just bills, Mary. Nothing for you to worry about. That phrase again, nothing for you to worry about. It had become their shield, their way of locking me out of my own life. I stood there, heart pounding, until Daniel pushed the papers into a folder and closed it. Mom, please, he said softly, don't make this harder. I wanted to scream, to tear the folder open, to demand the truth. But I knew if I did, they would call me hysterical, unreasonable. So instead, I smiled, a tight, bitter smile, and said, of course, I wouldn't want to make things harder. Then I walked calmly to my room, though inside I was burning. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at the small desk in my room, the lamp casting a weak pool of light, and began to write. Not a letter of accusation, not yet. A record, every date, every word, every moment they had dismissed me, every piece of proof I had collected, the bank withdrawals, the letter about the assets, the overheard conversations. I wrote it all down. If they wanted to paint me as irrelevant, I would arm myself with truth. The next morning, I hid the notebook carefully beneath the lining of my old suitcase. It gave me comfort, knowing that my story existed somewhere outside of my own memory, somewhere they couldn't erase. Days passed and the tension thickened. Then one afternoon, as I was folding laundry, I heard a knock at the door. A man in a suit stood there, holding a clipboard. "Mrs. Evans?" he asked. My heart skipped. "Yes," I replied cautiously. "I have papers requiring your acknowledgement," he said, handing me an envelope. I signed mechanically, my hand trembling, and closed the door before opening it. Inside was confirmation of what I had feared. They were finalizing the transfer of my name off certain accounts and leases. My role was being reduced to occupant, a shadow on paper, just as I had felt in life. I sat down heavily on the bed, the papers spread across my lap. The betrayal was complete, printed in black and white. My son's name was there, alongside hers, bound together against me. For a long time, I stared at the signatures, remembering the tiny hand that had once clutched mine so tightly, the boy who had whispered, "Don't leave me, Mama," when storms rattled the windows at night. Now he was the storm. Tears blurred the words, but when they cleared, I felt something shift inside me. The grief was still there, sharp and deep, but beneath it was iron. They thought they had written me out of the story, but I still held the pen. I still had my voice, my truth, my record. That evening, I walked into the living room where Daniel and Lily sat watching television. I stood tall, holding the papers in my hand. "I know what you're doing," I said quietly, but firmly, "and I won't allow it, not anymore." Daniel looked stricken, his mouth opening to speak, but Lily cut in, her tone dripping with false sympathy. "Mary, you're tired. You're imagining things. Maybe it's time you saw a doctor." I raised my hand, silencing her. "Don't you dare," I hissed, my voice stronger than I expected. "Don't you dare try to make me doubt my own mind. I see you. I see everything, and you will not take what is mine." The room fell silent, the air crackling with tension. I turned and walked back to my room, closing the door with deliberate calm. My hands were shaking, but my heart felt steady. For the first time, I had spoken without begging, without fear. As I lay in bed that night, listening to the muffled arguments beyond the door, I knew the battle was no longer just quiet maneuvers and whispered betrayals. The war had begun in earnest. And though I was tired, though I was worn, I was not defeated, because even storms, once ignored, will find their voice, and when they break, they do not ask for permission. The apartment grew colder with each passing day, though the calendar insisted spring had already arrived. It wasn't the weather outside, it was the air between us. Every exchange was clipped, every glance weighted with accusation or avoidance. Daniel moved like a man divided, torn between two loyalties, but too weak to stand firmly in either. Lily grew sharper, her words barbed with condescension. And me? I became a presence they could neither ignore nor erase, a shadow that refused to vanish. I began rising earlier than both of them, brewing coffee, tidying the kitchen, leaving my fingerprints everywhere like silent declarations. I am still here. When Lily rolled her eyes at the smell of toast, when Daniel sighed at the sight of folded laundry, I felt a strange kind of satisfaction. They wanted me invisible, but every small act of persistence was a rebellion. Still, the tension was reaching a breaking point. One evening, Daniel came into my room, his shoulders hunched. He closed the door softly, like a boy sneaking into confession. "Mom," he began, his voice low, "can't you just let this go? Lily's only trying to build a future for us. She's scared. She thinks—" His voice faltered. "She thinks you want to take everything away from us." My chest tightened. "Take everything?" I whispered. "Daniel, everything you have, everything came from me. How could she twist it so?" He rubbed his forehead, eyes tired. "She says you're clinging too hard, that you can't let me go." I stood, my voice trembling with both rage and grief. "Let you go? I let you go every day of my life. When I let you walk to school alone, when I let you stay out late, when I let you marry without question. I gave, and now all I ask is a place to stand, and you call that clinging?" He couldn't look at me. He muttered, "I don't know what to do," and left the room, his retreat more painful than any blow. That night, as I sat alone, I opened my notebook, the one where I had recorded every detail, every insult, every betrayal. The pages stared back at me like silent witnesses. I realized then that this wasn't just a family quarrel. This was a slow erasure, a rewriting of my story until I was nothing but a burden, a ghost, and I would not allow it. The next day, I made an appointment with the lawyer again. She reviewed the new papers I had received, her jaw tightening. "They're building a case to show you're dependent," she said flatly. "If they succeed, they could argue you're incapable of managing your own affairs. That would give them control." My blood ran cold. "They want to declare me incompetent?" The word tasted like poison. She nodded. "It's rare, but I've seen it before. Families doing this to the elderly for property, money, assets. We'll fight it, of course. But you need to be strong. They'll try to break you." I left her office with the city buzzing around me, but I felt like I was walking through a storm no one else could see. To be stripped not just of money or home, but of self, my mind, my autonomy, was the deepest betrayal of all. When I returned, Lily was waiting at the door, arms crossed, her smile stretched tight. "Long day?" she asked, her tone dripping with false sweetness. I brushed past her, too weary to spar, but she followed me into the kitchen, her voice dropping. "You know, Mary, it would be easier for everyone if you just relaxed. Stop fighting us. Let us take care of things. You'll be more comfortable that way." I turned slowly, meeting her eyes with a fire I hadn't felt in years. "Comfortable," I said, the word heavy with disdain. I didn't raise a child through hunger and heartbreak to spend my last years comfortable. I raised him to stand by me, to honor me, and if he won't, then at least let the record show. I will not go quietly into the box you've built for me." Her face tightened, but she said nothing, only spun on her heel and left the room. That night, I heard them arguing behind their closed door. Lily's voice sharp, insistent. "She's manipulating you. Can't you see? If you don't put a stop to this, we'll lose everything." Daniel's voice was softer, pleading. "She's my mother, Lily. I can't just—" The rest was muffled, but the rhythm of their anger filled the apartment like drums of war. The baby's cry broke through the noise, small and fragile. I went to him, lifting him gently, rocking him in my arms. His tiny hand wrapped around my finger, and tears filled my eyes. "I will fight for you too," I whispered, "so that one day you know your grandmother was not weak, that I did not bow to lies." When Daniel emerged later, his eyes red, he found me cradling his son. For a fleeting moment, guilt softened his face. But then Lily appeared behind him, her gaze hard, and the moment vanished like smoke. He took the baby silently and returned to their room. I went back to mine and sat at the edge of the narrow bed, listening to the hum of the dryer in the wall. My heart ached, but my resolve was steel. They could whisper, they could scheme, they could file all the papers they wanted, but I still had my voice, my memory, my truth. And when the storm inside me finally broke, I knew it would not only rattle the walls of this apartment, it would shake the foundations of everything they had built on betrayal. The question was no longer if it would break, it was when. The days that followed felt like walking across thin ice, every step a risk of breaking through. Daniel avoided me more than ever, slipping out early for work, returning late, speaking only when silence became unbearable. Lily, on the other hand, seemed emboldened by something, perhaps her growing control, perhaps Daniel's weakness. She moved through the apartment as though it were already hers alone, her smile sharp, her words deliberate. And I, though weary, refused to shrink. Every glance, every breath was a reminder, I am still here. One evening, I returned from the grocery store, carrying a small bag of essentials I had bought with my own money: bread, milk, a little jam. I placed them carefully on the counter. Lily walked in, eyeing the bag. "You don't need to do that," she said smoothly. "We provide for this household. It confuses things when you start buying on your own." Her words cut deeper than she realized. Provide? As though I were some helpless tenant depending on her charity. I lifted the loaf of bread slowly, holding it between us. "This bread," I said, "was bought with money I earned through years of work, money I saved when your generation was still learning to walk. Don't you dare tell me I can't provide for myself." Her cheeks flushed, but she masked it quickly. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." Then, with a tilt of her head, she added softly, "Daniel deserves peace. Don't you want that for him?" The manipulation was clear, yet it stung. Of course I wanted peace for my son. I had spent my entire life sacrificing for his comfort. But peace bought with my silence, my erasure, was no peace at all. It was a prison. I turned away, ending the conversation, but inside, my fury was growing teeth. That night, I pulled out my notebook again, adding Lily's words to the list. Each entry was a stone, heavy and undeniable. When the time came, I would have a mountain of truth they could not bury. The breaking point arrived sooner than I expected. A week later, Daniel came into my room, holding a thick envelope. His hands trembled as he passed it to me. "Mom," he began, voice strained, "we need you to sign these. It's just legal formalities. It'll make everything easier." I opened the envelope, scanning the documents. My blood turned to ice. They were papers granting them power over my finances, my decisions, my very autonomy. Guardianship, they called it. As if I were a child, as if I were incapable. My hands shook, but my voice was steady. "Daniel, what is this?" He looked away, shame flooding his face. Lily says it's for the best, so we can handle things properly. You wouldn't have to worry anymore." "Wouldn't have to worry," I echoed. "Daniel, I survived hunger, abandonment, years of labor. I raised you with nothing but my own 2 hands, and now you stand before me and ask me to sign myself into silence?" His lips parted, but no words came. I slammed the papers down on the table. "No, I will not sign. Not today, not ever." The door opened then, and Lily appeared, her eyes narrowing at the sight of the unsigned documents. "Mary," she said softly, dangerously, "you're being unreasonable. You'll make everything harder for Daniel, for the baby. Is that what you want? To be remembered as the obstacle in their lives?" Her words struck like daggers, but I refused to flinch. "If fighting for my dignity makes me an obstacle, then so be it. At least I will not be remembered as a coward." For the first time, I saw Lily's mask crack. Her smile vanished, replaced by raw anger. "You'll regret this," she spat before storming out of the room. Daniel lingered, his face pale, his body frozen between us. I looked at him, my son, the boy I had once carried on my hip, the man now standing as a stranger. "Daniel," I whispered, "one day you will realize what you've done. And I pray it won't be too late." He left without a word, closing the door softly behind him. That night, I could not sleep. I sat in the dark, the city lights flickering through the window, the hum of the dryer echoing through the wall like a heartbeat. My mind raced with fear and fury, but beneath it all was clarity. They had shown me their hand. They wanted to strip me of everything, my money, my autonomy, my very name. But I was not powerless. I had my records, my lawyer, my will. I pulled out my notebook, laying the documents beside it, and began to write again. Every detail, every betrayal, every moment of cruelty. And then, for the first time, I wrote something else, a plan. Not just defense, but action. They wanted to bury me, but I would rise higher than they ever imagined. By dawn, my tears had dried. The fear was still there, but it no longer ruled me. I was ready. The storm inside me was no longer a rumble. It was lightning crackling at the edges, waiting to strike. As the first rays of sunlight crept into my small room, I whispered to myself, "You chose her over me, Daniel. But soon you'll see what it means to choose wrong." I woke that morning with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. The letter, the documents, the whispered schemes, they had all been chiseling away at me, but now the stone was carved into something sharp, something unbreakable. I was no longer only a mother grieving her son's betrayal. I was a woman reclaiming her voice. The storm that had been gathering inside me was no longer waiting. It was here, and it would break. I dressed carefully, smoothing every wrinkle from my blouse, pinning my hair with deliberate precision. In the mirror, I saw not an old woman on the verge of being erased, but someone who had carried fire through decades of darkness. My eyes, though ringed with tiredness, burned with a light I hadn't seen in them for a long time. Today, I would not sit quietly. Today, I would speak until the walls themselves remembered me. In the living room, Daniel and Lily sat with the baby, their heads bent together over more papers. The sight ignited the familiar ache in my chest, but I swallowed it down. "We need to talk," I said, my voice steady. They looked up, startled, as if they hadn't expected me to walk in with such certainty. Lily was the first to recover. "Mary, not now. We're busy." "No," I cut in, my tone slicing through her words. "Now, because I will not let another day pass where you pretend I don't exist." Daniel shifted uncomfortably. "Mom, please, Don't make this harder. Harder? I laughed bitterly. Do you know what hard is, Daniel? Hard was selling my wedding ring so you could smile without shame. Hard was working until my hands cracked so you could eat. Hard was carrying you alone when your father walked away. And after all of that, you bring me here, into this apartment, and call me a burden. You try to strip me of everything I have left. If this is hard for you, then you have no idea what strength looks like. The room fell silent, the baby cooing softly, as though to fill the space where their words had failed. I placed my notebook on the table, opening it to the pages where I had written every detail. I have kept records, I said firmly. Every withdrawal, every attempt to silence me, every insult. If you think I am powerless, think again. This story will not be buried. Lily's face flushed with fury. You're being dramatic. No one will believe. Believe? I interrupted. They will believe the truth because it is written in your own actions, in your own signatures. And if I must, I will stand before a judge and show them exactly who you are. You may have stolen my son's loyalty, but you will not steal my dignity. Daniel's hands trembled on the papers. He looked between us, torn, his face pale. For the first time in weeks, he met my eyes. There was fear there, yes, but also something else. Shame. The boy I had raised was still buried inside him, struggling to breathe beneath the weight of Lily's influence. Mom, he whispered, his voice cracking. I didn't mean, I just wanted peace. Tears filled my eyes, but I stood tall. Peace built on betrayal is not peace, Daniel. It is silence. And I will not be silent. For a long moment, none of us spoke. Then Lily stood abruptly, gathering the papers in her arms. This is madness, she hissed. She's trying to turn you against me. She stormed into the bedroom, slamming the door behind her. Daniel sat frozen, the baby shifting restlessly in his lap. I stepped closer, placing a hand gently on his shoulder. My son, I said softly, you are standing on a line. On one side is truth, on the other is convenience. You must decide which man you want to be. His eyes filled with tears, and he turned his face away. He did not answer, but in that silence, I saw the battle raging inside him. I knew the choice would be his, and his alone. I left the room then, not waiting for his decision, because I had made mine. I gathered my suitcase from the corner of my small room, tucking my notebook safely inside. I would not be forced out in shame. I would walk out in strength. I would claim my own space, my own story, my own future. As I closed the door behind me, the hallway smelled of polish and paint, indifferent to the drama unfolding inside. The city outside was alive with noise, people rushing, cars honking, life moving forward. For the first time in months, I felt I was part of it again, not hidden, not erased, but alive. I walked to the lawyer's office with my head high. The fight ahead would be long and bitter, but I was ready. I would not surrender my life to whispers and forged papers. My truth would stand, and if I had to shout it from the rooftops, I would. That night, alone in a small rented room paid with my own hands' savings, I wrote the final entry in my notebook. They tried to silence me, but I found my voice. They tried to erase me, but I wrote myself back. I gave my son everything, and he chose her over me, but I chose myself, and in the end, that is enough. I closed the notebook, tears streaming but heart steady. I thought of my grandson's tiny hand gripping mine, the promise of a future where he would know his grandmother, not as a shadow, but as a woman who stood unbroken. So I ask you, who have listened to my story, what would you have done in my place? Would you have stayed silent to keep the peace, or would you have fought for your dignity? Tell me, from which city are you watching? And if my story touched you, do not forget me. Subscribe so that my voice and voices like mine can continue to be heard, because no one deserves to be erased.